Hi everyone. So I did an audio check. I hope that it is going to work properly this time. It's been kind of on and off, so yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I checked it and it was working. So hopefully all is well. Um, I've kind of found a hack to not be drinking cold coffee 20 minutes into my lives. It's a little bit less like emotional support because you can't like it's not this like cozy warm cup that you can hold on to, but at least I can keep it warm a little bit. So that helps. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm just gonna kind of do a little bit of introduction while I wait to see if anyone still wants to join. So I'm Sarah. I'm a sleep, stress management, and recovery coach, and I go into all things rest, recovery, resilience, and health fulfillment, and particularly for women in healthcare. And today we're going to be talking about burnout. And if there's anything that you want to share, anything that you want to ask, or any kind of just experiences that you've had as well, you're welcome to just pop them in the comments. If you are watching the replay afterwards, just type hashtag replay and just anything that you want to say about anything that we speak about today. So, as usual, I just have my notes up to the side. So if you see me looking off to the side, it's not because I'm distracted. Um, so I just wanted to start a little bit with the definition because depending on where you live, you might be very familiar with burnouts. Like obviously everyone knows what burnout is, or you might be like, what the heck? I have no idea what you're even talking about. Um, I've personally experienced that working in different countries. In the Netherlands, you hear it on a daily basis. You hear about burnout. Here, it's like a medically diagnosed thing where people take time off work and they have to be diagnosed by their GP, etc. Whereas when I was practicing in South Africa, I didn't even know that there was such thing. So it definitely differs per country and also just what you are, what kind of spaces you're in that you might or might not hear about those things. Sorry, I just realized. Oh, there we go. Hi, Lauren. I was like, I see a comment. I mean, it says that there's a comment, and I was like, I don't know how to look at the comments. Okay, awesome. I'm glad the sound is working. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, cool. I'm gonna then put my notes to this side because the comments pop up here. Okay, awesome. So it was diagnosed, or it was defined a very long time ago by a guy called Friedenberg, and it actually, actually initially was defined in healthcare providers. It is now kind of extended to other professions, to include other professions, and it's generally known as an occupational phenomenon. So it's a phenomenon that you experience at work. And actually, in the latest ICD, they also defined burnout not as a medical condition, but just as an occupational phenomenon. So it's not, it is in the, for those of those that don't know, the ICD-10 is like the psychological handbook of all the psychological and mental illnesses. And they discuss burnout in that, but it isn't an official like medical condition that you get. It's just something that happens at work. And the reason they specifically defined it at work is because they wanted to have, they wanted to keep those definitions separate. So if you think about burnout, you can almost get it from any aspect of your life, but they wanted to make sure that when they're talking about burnout, people know that it's a workplace phenomenon, and then almost finding a different word, which I don't know if they have a different word for that yet, if it's not in the workplace. So depending on there are different studies that you can look at in terms of like prevalence of this. It ranges from about 1 in 3 healthcare providers to half of healthcare providers that show at least one symptom of burnout, and that we'll discuss in a second. But that's a pretty scary statistic. And the prevalence of suicide in healthcare providers is absolutely massive, which is also such a scary thought. And this is from med student days or like student days onwards. This is not even only when you've been practicing for a while, but actually kind of from the very beginning. And it's quite scary to think of people who are, going into a profession because they want to be helping, and they end up destroying their own life and health and mental state, I guess. So when I heard that, I was just like, that's absolutely crazy statistic. I think it was like 100 and don't quote me on this. I will go and check this out and maybe put it in the comments or something. But I think it was like particularly female healthcare providers were like 140% more likely to commit suicide than the general population. And I think for males it was just slightly less than that. So it's very significant. So when we're talking about symptoms of burnout, there are three main symptoms of burnout, or things that you can characterize someone as having burnout if they have these symptoms. The first one is just exhaustion. So emotional exhaustion, physical exhaustion, but just feeling like your energy is completely depleted. And the second one is what they call like depersonalization, or like a distancing from your job, feeling like it doesn't really matter. You're not really connecting to the person that you're with. It's kind of like this emotional disconnect, emotional distance from your work and what you're doing. And then the third symptom is reduced professional efficacy. So your own self-evaluation specifically of how you are performing is significantly decreased. And this is one of the symptoms that tends to be higher in women, which I find really interesting, that we tend to view our performance as being detrimentally affected more than a male would. But the other symptoms tend to be quite equal in males and females. Um, so, like I mentioned with suicide, even if it doesn't get to that extreme, there are obviously so many different things that this is affecting, or why this is so important. And that is not only for the clinician themselves, for their health and well-being, but also for their role as a healthcare provider. So if you are treating patients and you are absolutely exhausted, you're not feeling connected to them, you're not connected to any sense of purpose, you feel like none of it matters, you feel like you just suck at your job, you're probably not going to be as good of a healthcare provider as you could be had those things not been there. So thinking of the clinician well-being, and then also the effect on the patient as well. And if you think of like the effect on the clinician themselves, this is, like I said, sometimes it goes quite extreme, goes to suicidal ideation and actual sometimes committing suicide. But it is also very highly correlated in general with anxiety and depression. And if you think of just the factors that would lead you to be exhausted and depersonalized and all that kind of stuff, you're probably going to be more likely to get into car accidents because you're really exhausted, or you are going to make mistakes because you are exhausted in your that these could be mistakes in your personal life as well that could have catastrophic consequences, or things like our diet, things like there are people who develop like alcoholic tendencies or other kind of bad health habits as a result of the burnout that just further increase their risk of having serious health conditions. So it kind of ends up being like this vicious cycle, because the health behaviors themselves, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if you're not exercising, that these can all be factors that can lead you to be burnt out quicker, or make you more at risk for burnout. But then also the other way around, the more burnt out you are, the more you're not going to care about how you eat, the more your sleep quality and quantity is going to be affected, and the more you're not going to care about other healthy things, like not, you know, smoking or um, drinking excessive amounts of alcohol, like all of that stuff. That can become coping mechanisms, and also can just be something that you care less about when you are in that space. So I just wanted to chat a little bit about um, the different factors that can cause someone to be more prone to burnout. So as a whole, healthcare providers have or the chance of you being a healthcare provider and also being, for example, perfectionistic, idealistic, having like very this big identity around being a helper, sometimes leading to like people pleasing or codependent behaviors. All those things are more likely to be present in healthcare providers, and they also are then factors that also predispose the healthcare providers to burnout even more. So some of the time, what actually makes us a really good healthcare provider also makes us more prone to being burnt out. Um, and then there's aspects of personality. So if you're familiar with the big five in personality, the two that are most strongly correlated with burnout, the one is neuroticism. So we tend to use the word neurotic in a slightly different way to what it means in a personality aspect. So it doesn't mean like you're constantly like neurotic about everything, like everything is a thing, constantly obsessed with everything and everything must be a certain way. So it's more the way they define it is a tendency towards anxiety, depression, self-doubt, and other negative feelings. So you're just more prone to those negative emotions as a neurotic person, which you can sort of see how that would predispose you more to becoming burnt out. And then the other one is low extroversion. So just because of how the scale works, they rate you on how highly you are extroverted. So they don't use introversion. They say you are low in extroversion. So people who are highly introverted, they are more likely to suffer from burnout than someone who is more on the highly extroverted end of the scale. Um, and then I kind of use this model to think about it because there are, of course, workplace factors, there are personal factors, and then there are kind of things in between. So often we can think about, you know, is it me? Is it work? You know, and often those kinds of thoughts come up when we see, for example, other people in our profession and we think like they don't seem like they're struggling, or we see a colleague in our same workplace that doesn't seem like they're struggling. It usually comes a little bit from comparison. Um, and the way that I like to think about it is the two extremes of this scale, let's say the spectrum. The one absolute extreme is that it's completely dependent on the person. So I don't necessarily mean it's their fault. Those are two very different things. Um, but it's more that whatever is kind of making up the totality of that person is the main problem. And I kind of think of this extreme end of it as you could almost put that person in any work environment and they would burn out just because of how much they, like, let's say their stress level is already here. They just need that tiny little bit to kind of tip them over. And then it's very little about the workplace itself. It's just that for whatever kind of combination of factors, that person is already so predisposed to burnout that they can almost be in any work environment and they will burn out. And then on the other extreme of this spectrum, you have the workplace where, sorry, this hand. You have the workplace where I always think of it as like on this end of the spectrum, this is the workplace where you could put anyone in there and they would burn out. So someone who's resilient, someone who has no other stresses in their life, someone who is kind of here on the like stresses in their life, but the work is like that much of a contribution, and you could put almost anyone in that work environment and they would burn out. So those are like the two extremes. And what it usually is more likely is that it's somewhere along that spectrum. And you can be kind of towards the end where it's more a personal thing, and you can be more towards the end where it's more a workplace thing. But anywhere in that in between, I almost think of it as it's you colliding with work. And that is where that kind of collision between the two is where the like issues or where the problems or where the kind of factors or causative things for you developing burnout, they come from that meeting place, I guess, between the two. So for example, let me just actually take some of my tea. Oh yay, still warm. Okay, so where was I? Yes, so in this like meeting place. So for an example, if I'm highly introverted, um, I'm working in an environment where I see a lot of people, um, I might feel completely exhausted by that, completely drained. My colleague, who is completely extroverted, is having the time of her life. She's thinking like, "What are you talking about? This place is amazing." Um, so it's not necessarily the workplace or the fact that me being introverted is necessarily a problem, but it's more me being introverted colliding with a workplace that is not like introvert friendly, let's say. This could also come in with things like in certain work environments that certain people, types of people, really thrive. So, for example, with the introversion extroversion thing, it could also be things like some people just have a personality where they always kind of enthusiastic and positive, and everyone responds very positively to that, whereas someone else might have different ways of like presenting themselves emotionally, that is not, and neither of those are necessarily good or bad, but one might receive better kind of feedback or better acceptance within that work environment. Or let's say there's a certain what do you call it, lost the word. Anyway, when someone is uh, in a position where they are, man, this is gonna bug me. Anyway, I'll try and carry on without it. But any kind of personal factors where the other person doesn't have that same factor, and so they are not really struggling, but because you are for whatever reason in that workplace environment not the same as the other person, you can get discriminated discriminated against. So say there's some aspect about you that is discriminated against in a certain work environment, and in for someone else who is not in that discriminated group, they don't see any issue with the workplace. Um, oh, that word. Okay, I think it's a word that I've forgotten a few times. So anyway, so moving on. So I wanted to see if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about. Oh yes, so the other mental model that I like to use when it comes to burnout is thinking about what exactly it is. So the actual definition is chronic workplace stress that hasn't been managed sufficiently. So if you think about stresses, so not in the sense of I'm stressed out by that, but stresses in the sense of um, something that is demanding resources of you. So I think of like a tank or a jar or cup or something of resources, and you have the tank itself and the um, fluid in the tank, and then you have like a tap that's coming out and draining resources from there. So you have things that are filling up the tank, and then you have things that are draining the tank. And the things draining the tank are the stresses. So just thinking of stresses as these are things that are demanding resources of you, not necessarily things that stress you out. And that's an important distinction because, for example, if I go on a 10K run, that is a stressor on my body, and I need to recover appropriately, and I need to rest appropriately, etc. But it's not considered like a bad thing. I don't get stressed out from going for a run, nor would someone be like, oh my gosh, you sound healthy, you just went for a run. It's not necessarily unhealthy things or stressful things or bad things. It's just things that are demanding resources of you. And then what you have kind of putting back into your tank is in general kind of rest, recovery, and resilience behaviors. These can be things like sleep behaviors, nutrition, stress management, movement, and all of these things can be filling the tank so that you have more to extract. So if you think about like a chronic workplace stress, you have more kind of being demanded of you than you are putting in. So just think about kind of like an imbalance of those things. And that's not to say that you can just compensate for like this terrible work environment that is so toxic and that treats its employees terribly. And you must just, meditate and, go and exercise and stuff. That's not what it's about. It's just saying like where on that balance are you, and how can you start kind of lowering how much is being demanded of you and increasing the rest and recovery and resilience practices. um, so one thing I just wanted to touch on with that is that things that are considered health behaviors, um, like I sort of alluded to with the running, it's not always something that is filling up your tank. And particularly when you're in the space of being really burnt out, you are so exhausted, you don't want to be starting with, health behaviors that are now almost ending up on the wrong side of the equation, where they actually end up draining things, draining resources more than they're actually adding to it. So these are things like just going to an extreme. This often happens with people who were at a certain level, particularly of athletics performance, before they got burnt out. And then they try and go straight back to what they were doing before, and they think that anything less is just like a waste of time because they're so used to doing things in quite an extreme way, or that they used to eat so well, and now they're kind of trying to go straight back to that. When you are in this space of burnout, you really want to start quite small, and you want to be starting with behaviors that are filling the tank, that are genuinely filling the tank, not things that just kind of seem healthy but are actually like demanding more of you than they're actually putting in. So I definitely recommend that people start um, at a different with a different kind of mindset than they maybe would if they weren't burned out. You can almost think of it as like um, this is like level ground, and if you are in like this hole, you are in this burnout uh, place of like burnout. And if you just try really hard and you try and climb up this hole and you like exerting yourself, eventually you're going to get tired and fall back to where you were. But if you almost thought of it as like every time I'm doing something, I'm almost like putting a little bit of support underneath my feet. I'm like putting ground into this hole until that gap between where I am and where level is so small that I can just kind of walk out basically. And if I ever do fall in again, I can easily climb back out because I'm not in that deep hole anymore. So it almost like requires a bit of a different approach. And then once you're on that sort of level ground, then you can start to basically like, climb a mountain, or, go further in that direction and be more, uh, perfectionistic about things if you want to. You can optimize things if you want to. You can increase your mileage or your weight if you weight training or whatever it is. Like, you can get there eventually if you want to. That's not required for health. It's just something that you might personally want to get to. But if you are burnt out, just think of little things that might just give you that little bit of support underneath you until you feel good enough that you can actually start doing the health behaviors that you want to be doing. So it's just a kind of reminder that something like um, eating healthy or eating healthy foods is not always like on this extreme. Like, you're either eating really well, or you might as well, not be trying. Um, if you are really extreme about it, if you're very perfectionist about it, if you're always worrying about it, if you're always beating yourself up about it, that ends up being more of a stressor than it ends up being something that is filling your tank. Same kind of thing with sleep. If you feel terrible, if you don't get the perfect sleep, or if you expect yourself to um, have like this incredibly rigid, perfect sleep schedule, and if that is disturbed in any way, you get anxious, or you just, write off the next day, whatever it is, that also ends up being more of a stressor than it ends up adding to your tank. So just thinking about it as like these things are not are just objectively good for you. It depends on actually how you do them. And when you are burnt out, you want to be thinking about it slightly differently to if everything was just, great, and I just have a health goal that I want to get to, and I'm just moving towards that. This is very different. Um, so I hope that helps, that kind of, way to think about it. And yeah, there are things that I wanted to sort of chat about in terms of, what kind of things um, can kind of what things tend to be in a workplace itself. But I think, we all have kind of a sense of that. Like, if it's really insane hours, or a lot of one of the things that comes up a lot is the like keeping up with electronic health records and stuff like that, doing notes. We all know the backlog of notes. Things like a high sense of responsibility. uh, that can be on the like personal side more, that you have a very strong sense of responsibility, or it can also be just the nature of your workplace has a very high like level of responsibility and risk. And then obviously things that are in an environment where you are dealing with a lot of people dying, or you almost have like secondhand trauma from that. Um, but yeah, I think that's one of the things that I just wanted to make clear is like, there are certain factors that make it quite obvious that people burn out. But I just want to make you aware that anyone can burn out in any profession, in any environment, and in any sort of situation, even if it looks like everyone around you seems to be coping fine and is doing well. Um, and if that's one thing that you can take away from this, is kind of this feeling of like, I get um, to sort of advocate for myself, and to realize like, this makes sense that I feel this way, for whatever reason, like for whatever collection of reasons. Your life is very unique. You have all these different factors that contribute to who you are as a person, and that is very different to the next person. So even if someone else doesn't necessarily understand, like, how can you be burnt out in like whatever your profession is, or whatever your work environment is, or whatever the case is, that you have like a that internal advocacy of that you are on your own side, and that you are supporting yourself. and that you are actually taking it seriously as well, which I think is part of that. Is if you feel like, oh, I shouldn't be burnt out, or it doesn't make any sense that I'm burnt out, or other people seem to be doing fine, then you also don't necessarily take your own feelings of burnout, your own symptoms of burnout seriously, and actually start taking action to start moving in a different direction. So self-advocacy is a huge part of this, and just kind of like a self-acceptance and compassion towards yourself, treating yourself like you would a friend. Like if a friend was telling you that they're struggling, that they're feeling burnt out, your uh, your reaction would probably be something along the lines of like, what can I do to help? What can I take off your plate? How can I help you, support you? And that's what we want to kind of learn to start doing for ourselves, and also asking other people for. So I hope you found that helpful. Let me know any questions or comments that you have in the chat. And this is definitely a conversation that we'll, carry on in the future. Is kind of setting the stage for like all the different aspects of it, and then we can dive deep into any of these. So also let me know if there's anything specific that resonated with you that you'd like to go into a little bit more. And also if there's anything specific that I mentioned today that you could like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I was struggling with that, or whatever it is. And we can start discussing this and actually kind of, getting it out in the open and actually support each other in all of this. So have a wonderful evening if you're in the same time zone as me. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.